For us, this has really been about creating a path for an important part of healthcare to join our plan. We have a long history of being a successful pension provider to the healthcare community in Ontario, and this is part of our desire to see more Ontario healthcare workers have really great pensions in their retirement, and we hope that will be a solution for a number of physicians across Ontario.
That's the voice of Rachel Arbour, who's the head of Plan Benefits Design and Policy at the Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plan, also known as HOOPP. Rachel works in the plan operations area of HOOPP and is the area that administers the pension benefit. So she works with members and employers to understand the benefits of HOOPP and support members in starting their pensions. And before working at HOOPP, which she's been working there for almost 10 years, she was a pension lawyer in private practice in Ontario. And the purpose of this episode is to help give you, the listener, an idea of what the HOOPP pension is all about. So it's for incorporated physicians in Ontario. If you're not a physician in Ontario, I'm going to do future episodes about pension options that you still have. When it comes to creating a pension, there's options. And part of what we talk about in this episode is that HOOPP may form part of an overall plan for someone. And part of the analysis is the numbers side of things, of how much are you going to put in and how much you're going to get out, and comparing HOOPP to other options like the individual pension plan, self-pensioning through corporate investments, RSPs, TFSAs. But then there is one unique thing about the HOOPP pension plan, which is the idea of a guaranteed income, which is unique to it as compared to most other options. So it's part of the analysis. I encourage you to do so. Listen in. I hope you enjoy it. So welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me.
About a month ago, someone said to me, "Hey, Galen, I heard that physicians are going to be able to join HOOPP, and what's this all about?" And I was like, "I'm not going to know until they release the link." And then I thought maybe I should find someone to be on the podcast. So I'm really glad we're able to pull it together quite quickly. So why don't you just give us what's the Coles Notes of physicians can now join HOOPP? What does that mean? What is HOOPP? Let's just walk through what that means for doctors in Ontario.
Sure. So HOOPP itself is the Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plan, like you said. We are a defined benefit, multi-employer, jointly sponsored pension plan. We've been around since 1960, so 65 years of paying pensions to healthcare workers in Ontario, and we're still only for Ontario. So our conversation today is about physicians who are practicing in Ontario. So we started as the Hospitals of Ontario Pension Plan, and basically, our members are healthcare workers across Ontario, and not just hospitals anymore. So that's been a big transformation in our history. Is we started with largely hospitals, and as healthcare and healthcare delivery has changed over time, we have changed over time. We now have over 700 employers in our plan, 475,000 plus members. And I'm using some updated numbers. If you go to our webpage, all the numbers are based on December 31, 2023. So I got some updated ones for you today. And what we have done that is different, that's new, is one of the things that didn't often happen was that physicians who worked in Ontario were often not eligible to join our plan. And so one of the conversations we've had over the last couple of years is how to change that to enable that segment of Ontario healthcare to join our plan. And we've come up with a solution. We've put it in place, and now we are open for physicians.
Very cool. Okay, so thanks for clarifying. So far, Ontario physicians, and one thing I'll add that I noticed is incorporated physicians. You have to have a corporation to be able to join. That's correct, right?
Yeah. So one of the things about joining a pension plan is that you have to, and this is a tax law rule in Canada, is you have to have an employer-employee relationship. And so someone who is a physician who's working for one of our existing HOOPP employers is already in our plan. There's a number of Ontario physicians who live in that traditional employer-employee relationship, and we already have them in our plan. But for physicians who operate as under MPCs in Ontario, there is an employee-employer relationship between the physician and their MPC often. And you'll know more of the details of how that works than I will. But so the MPC will become eligible to join HOOPP as a participating employer, so that the physician and any other employees of the MPC can then join as a member of our plan.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I got that. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely that employer-employee relationship of the Medicine Professional Corporation, which is a very unique kind of a corporation, which I've talked about in other episodes, but very cool that you have, your group has done the work to figure out how it makes sense for doctors. And I mean, maybe it goes without saying, but pension. So as I mentioned before we hit record, I have very few clients who have pensions the way that people think about pensions, like, oh, they were a teacher for 30 years, now they have a pension, or they worked for Hydro for 30 years, now have a pension. Very few of most of my clients are doctors or business owners that need to make their own pension. Now, years ago, I put a survey out there that about 100 physicians answered, and it was just questions about, like, what do you want to know about finances? And the last question I said was, if you had a magic button that you could press and it would change your finances in any given way, what would you want? And the most common answer was a pension. And the reason that I've seen, just in my experience, is it's nice to know that, like, basically getting a paycheck in retirement is a big deal for someone's peace of mind. And one of the ways to do that is through a pension. And so very cool that this is an option on the table now.
Well, and you use the example of the teachers and their pensions, but most of your physicians will work with nurses in Ontario.
Yeah.
And right, and this is, the plan that the nurses in Ontario are participating in, and it's for, amongst other healthcare workers, of course, but now we're opening up the plan to your physicians that they see their nurses already able to participate in, to get the same benefit from the plan, and to get all the attributes that those nurses, when they retire, can go home and say, oh, look, I can retire now, and I can count on a steady income in my retirement, et cetera, et cetera. So it is pretty cool. It is pressing that magic button, as you said.
No, definitely. No, yeah, very good bringing it, because nurses is a real life example of someone who can benefit. So kind of cool to equalize that a bit, of, like, nurses could access it for quite some time, and now physicians can too. And so when you mentioned, we're talking about a paycheck in retirement, which is, like, helps with people's peace of mind. Now, when it comes, you mentioned defined benefit. So I think it is worthwhile to spend a little bit of time sort of getting a little bit specific about, what does that mean, defined benefit? What does that look like? Maybe some of the, like, the nuts and bolts of what does it look like for someone to participate in the HOOPP pension.
Sure. Well, and when we talk about that paycheck in retirement, we're talking about the pension benefit that you can start anytime after age 55. You have to start it by age 71. And that pension will be based on a formula. And that formula will take into account your years of service in the plan, your earnings, and the age at which you start receiving that pension. So if you retire before 65, there are some different rules that apply to it. And after 65, it'll actually increase to reflect the part where you haven't started it at 65. So the pension at the end of the day is based on those factors: your age, your service, and your earnings. To build that pension, you have to join the plan and start contributing. Our contributions to the plan are set by our board on an annual basis. They've been steady for 20 years now. But it's not a matter that your contributions are what creates your pension at the end of the day. Your contributions is a rate setting process that we do here at HOOPP, but your benefit is based on that formula that I was talking about before. So unlike other models of retirement savings, it's not what your contributions in plus investment return create for you, and then you figure that out at the end of the day for yourself. You can, when you join the plan, you can pretty much say, oh, if I stay in this plan for 10 years and this is the formula and this is my earnings rate, this is what I know I will receive when I go to retire at age 65, which is one of the great advantages of being in a defined benefit plan. It's that benefit at the end of the day that is defined for you. And then on top of that, we offer, cost of living increases, that our board makes a decision on an annual basis. We offer survivor benefits, disability benefits, the ability to manage leaves. But it is really that vision you have of what the teachers and the nurses have in terms of that peace of mind in retirement.
Yeah, no, that's a good, like, thanks for walking through that, sort of what it looks like, what determines the payout. And I mean, really, like, I remember when I became an advisor, like, I didn't know anything about pensions, and they said, okay, there's a kind called defined benefit and there's a kind called defined contribution. And so, like, most companies in the world, or sorry, I shouldn't say in the world, but in Canada, I mean, my wife was a member of one a while back, where they moved from defined benefit to defined contribution. And the way I explain it to people is I just say, like, yeah, defined benefit, you know what you're going to get at the end. Defined contribution, you know what you're putting in at the beginning, but you don't 100% know what you're getting at the end. And one of the words that I was taught when I became an advisor to be very careful with is the word guarantee. And they
Yes.
said like you cannot throw around the word guarantee in very few situations can you actually use that word. So I think that I mean the important distinction, as far as I can tell, is like it is different in the sense that let's just say I'm going to put my money into an RSP, for example, like, and I'm going to invest it in the market. I can use averages to kind of figure out what I'm going to have at the end. But the guarantees aren't usually there as to what's actually going to be there. Whereas with a defined benefit plan, you put in the money and then you know what you're going to get at the end. And we can talk a bit about the mechanics of how that's possible compared to like someone who's trying to do this on their own.
Well, and I would say that's one of the major differences is you're not doing it on your own. You're doing it in
Mm-hmm.
coordination with 475,000 other people across Ontario. So, you're pooling that investment risk. You're pooling the longevity risk that that you live longer than you planned for. Uh, our members don't worry about what happens in the market day to day, as long
Mm-hmm.
as their pension can continue to be fully funded as it has been for 15 years now. And there's a confidence in knowing that you can count on that predictable retirement income, and that's what we do for our members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think yeah, and that when it comes to defined benefit, defined contribution, and like the options that are out there, one of the things we were talking about before I hit record is like at the end of the day, I my role is to help people figure out what options are available and which ones make the most sense based on unique situations, based on all sorts of factors, knowing an individual. Funny enough, last night was the first conversation I'd had with a doctor for financial planning that we said, hey, we're going to include an analysis around HOOPP in your plan because HOOPP isn't the only option. Like, I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, there's the places that every incorporated physician has available is corporation, TFSA, RSP, and then there are other types of pensions that I've talked about in other podcasts, like the IPP, for example. So at the end of the day, I'm not saying those are better or worse, but there are differences that I think are important for people to understand when it comes to figuring out which different things they're going to do to be successful in retirement.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I would just add to that it is hard when you have been doing it on your own to
Mm-hmm.
also understand and appreciate how to work in the collective world of HOOPP and how to understand what it means to have access to a defined benefit plan. And what we look to do here at HOOPP is create a path for people so that they can, or what we've been trying to do is create a path for physicians to come into us, but we do want physicians to make the decision that it's the best decision for them. We as an organization do a lot of research year over year, and we publish it about the value of a pension, the value of a well-managed pension, what employees and what employers get out of having good, stable retirement income. We feel really passionately about all of those topics, and we publish a lot of that research on our webpage each year. But we believe in the attributes, the value of a good pension, a well-managed, professionally run arrangement, and that's what we have to offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have very few clients who have pensions because that's just not the people I end up working with. But I do know like who the word hoop and has been floating around ever since I became an advisor. I was like, what is this hoop thing that people are talking about? Like, I don't even know what it is and what you can get for it. So yeah, definitely. And we can dive into a little bit more of the specifics. So you mentioned one thing that I think is important to look at is, and I think a question that people will have is what does happen if I pass away? Like, let's say I'm contributing to HOOPP and I pass away, or I'm retired and I'm getting an income and I pass away. Like that is one thing that's on top of mind for people who have estate planning, goals. Can you walk through a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure, no problem. And the answer to that will depend a bit on when you pass away,
Mm.
and may require us to talk about some pension concepts. So you'll tell me if I need to go less deep or more deep. So
Okay.
um, if a person who has retired from HOOPP passes away in their retirement, it will depend on when they pass away, whether or not there's a benefit that continues to be available to a spouse or a beneficiary. So if when you retire, you are single, we guarantee the payment of your pension for 15 years after your retirement. So that means if you pass away in year one, and I hope you don't, but there will be a payment payable of your lifetime pension for the remaining 14 years to whomever you have designated or however
Mm-hmm.
many people you've designated. That's at the max of what the Income Tax Act allows us to do. And it's
Mm-hmm.
quite unusual to see a pension plan in Canada that offers that benefit. Similarly, if you are married when you retire, there's all sorts of rules across every jurisdiction in Canada that says that the pension has to continue to your spouse for their lifetime. We also do that at the maximum permitted under the Income Tax Act, which is really unusual. So we will guarantee your pension, your lifetime pension for a 5-year period. And then the payment we will make to your spouse after that 5-year period is up is, and that's 5 years from when you retired, is at 66 2/3 of your pension. So the pension reduces to 66 2/3 and pays out for the remainder of your spouse's lifetime. Now, when you retire, if you have a spouse, you have the option to pick if it's at 66 2/3, or you can increase it to an 80 or 100% of your pension. And there's a bit of an adjustment to your pension every month to reflect that extra payment you want to see out to your spouse at the end of the day, which we do on an actuarial basis. But effectively, we do the maximum we can. And that's a change we did to our plan a couple of years ago. And those are the benefits that are payable. Now, if both you and your spouse have passed away before the 5 years, that 5-year guarantee continues to go to your beneficiary or estate. On the individuals who pass away before they start their pension, the payment is the commuted value of the pension. So that is a actuarial term that means that we have assessed the value of your pension today and turned that into a lump sum amount, and that's what you're entitled to, or your estate or your beneficiary will be entitled to if you pass away before retirement. And if you have a spouse, that individual has a preference over that under minimum standards pension laws in most jurisdictions. So in Ontario, that's the case. But if you have a spouse, they get the pre-retirement death benefit or the commuted value of your pension. And that's the requirement of law. So that's not a space for, that's just what every pension plan is supposed to do in Ontario.
Very good. Okay, so insight into different scenarios there. Obviously, been doing this for a long time, so I've thought of every possible scenario of what happens and what happens to the income. No, very good, because I think that's something that people have in mind of, like, since a lot of physicians might not be aware of how pensions work, in this scenario, that's important to kind of know how that works if something happens, unexpected happens, but where does all the money go? And then the other thing, we did already talk about defined benefit, but I think it is worth mentioning, as I said, people have different options, right? Like the traditional investments like TFSA, RSP, and then saving inside of the corporation. And then people can also set up, I will refer to it as like the individual pension plan, like one that you set up on your own. And I think one of the things that's important, I think, for people to understand is the difference, like that term defined benefit isn't exactly the same in the context of a pension like HOOPP, in a context of like the IPP. I was wondering if you could walk through, like, how does it differ? Like, I know the term is the same. Like, I've heard people say, oh, you set up I work with IPP people, and they say, set this up, you'll have a defined benefit. But it's not the same in the sense that, like we've said, like, you're kind of on your own when it comes to the IPP, but with something like HOOPP, you're part of a bigger group. So maybe if you could walk us through, like, that difference there.
Yeah, in my view, it's largely a matter of scale. And an individual pension plan is largely, but not exclusively, one person in a pension arrangement to support a retirement outcome. And I'm not an expert in IPPs. And so, but there is a difference between participating in a plan where the investment decisions, the investment risk, and the cash flow into the plan is very different when you compare it to a plan the size of ours, and all of our investment professionals who are also participants in the plan and making those investment decisions, and the ability to pool the risk that commonly you see in individual driven products, like that longevity risk, like the investment risk. You're just not doing it alone. You're doing it with that 475,000 other people. And when you talk about sort of the other products that are available to physicians, I think it's important to put the HOOPP plan in context in terms of it being part of an overall plan. It doesn't have to be the only solution that someone picks. And, the key driver here is the pensionable earnings that the physician receives or takes from their corporation. So there's a concept with the pension plan, or with the HOOPP plan in particular, but not exclusively to HOOPP, that your pension is based on your pensionable earnings, and
Mm-hmm.
your pensionable earnings are the employment income, in this case, that you take from your medical professional corporation as a physician. So we know that physicians have extraordinarily diverse strategies that they use in terms of their employment income, their non-employment income, what they're holding in their corporation, what they're not holding in their corporation, whether or not they are pulling out employment income to maximize things like CPP and RRSPs and TFSAs and things of that sort. We're in that mix of things where decisions can be made about, and maybe the HOOPP plan will help solidify some decisions around employment income coming out of the corporation, but it's not exclusive to other solutions that a physician can use. The key is when you join the plan as a physician, we have a rule around how much that your employment income for purposes of HOOPP will change year over year.
Mm-hmm.
So we will ask you to say to us, I am regularly pulling out $75,000 worth of employment income from my professional corporation. And you'll see that there's an example on our webpage that walks through what this means. And so we will take that $75,000, we'll call it your baseline earnings, and then year over year, we will hold you to sort of the ability to increase those earnings at a rate of CPI plus 1% or decrease those earnings. And if you're within that window, full year of service, full accrual of pensions. If you go below that, we will adjust your service. That's how we make it fair to the plan. So you won't get a full year of service in our plan. If you go down 25%, then loosely speaking, we'll reduce your service by 25%. And you can still make the decision to take more employment income out of your MPC to support whatever you need in your lifestyle. But for pension plan purposes, we'll limit you to that upward level of CPI plus 1%. And that's how we are keeping this design for physicians fair to the rest of the members of our plan, who generally speaking see their earnings grow at a relatively steady pace year over year and don't have a lot of variation of earnings, because we don't really want to interfere with how the physician is organizing their own financial life, as it were. We want to be an option available to them that fits within that category.
Okay, very good. Yeah. So, no, that's very helpful, and to understand that, like first and foremost, like you said, it's not the only thing that people, necessarily should be doing with their money or to set themselves up for success in retirement, and that there are certain parameters that need to be met. Like, if I'm understanding correctly, if someone is only dividending themselves out of their corporation and not generating a T4 income, then they're not creating the opportunity to use this, which I mean, I started this profession 10 years ago, and 10 years ago, a lot of physicians were only dividending. And then a lot of them, I mean, as different things changed, more and more people moved, I think, to the pattern of at least some T4 income to be able to create RSP room and the opportunity to join different types of plans that were available. And that's what I recommended a lot of my clients to do, was to say, hey, you may in the future want to do some of these things. And if you don't have any T4 income, you're not going to be able to do these things. So that sounds like a part of it as well, is that the T4 income needing to be a part of the formula.
Yeah, and the T4 income part of it is that's also a tax law requirement. So you have to have an employment-employer relationship. You have to have employment income. That's what supports the registered pension plan rules. So a physician who's taking no employment income out of their MPC is not going to be a physician who will find joining HOOPP an appropriate activity for them, unless they want to rearrange how they're taking their income out of their corporation.
Right. Yeah. And so it's definitely like, I mean, the way that I talk about these decisions is it's almost like I think of it as like a spider web of like, just even a decision that may appear somewhat simple, as do I keep my money inside of my corporation versus pull it out, like invest inside of my corporation versus TFSA, RSP, IPP, HOOPP, all that. I usually say, it's a bit of a spider web. Like you pull on one string and it kind of messes with other strings. And so there is some work there to be done of like, okay, if I start taking a T4 income, what does that look like? How does it trickle down to all these other different things? And is it worth it in that? But I mean, for the most part, I'd say the physicians I've been meeting, they're already doing a T4 income. Like not many I find are still doing straight dividends, just because of different things that changed in the last 10 years over corporations. But in going down this line of thought around who is a good fit, is there like a sweet spot or like a point at which someone's too far in their career, so like, oh, I'm only going to work for one more year. Is it worth it to do something new, or is it more like I've just incorporated, I've got, decades of work ahead of me. It's a good time. Like, is there something in there around like when might it make the most sense from a time perspective?
So I think whether or not it makes sense to you individually as a physician is going to be up to you individually as the physician to
Mm,
decide if this is something that is worthwhile to you. We like people who come in and spend time in our plan. Many, many years is great. That is our ideal from a demographic and plan management perspective. But from a rules perspective, we see members who come in and leave for any number of reasons, right?
mm,
Legitimately, in the normal course of business affairs, we'll see people with 1 year of service, we'll see people with 3 months of service, we'll see people with 25 years of service, we'll see people with 40 years of service. So we're a bit subject to the rule that you have to start your pension by the time you're 71, and that's also a tax rule.
mm,
Um, you can join our plan at age 70.
mm,
I don't think you'd want to be honest. I've not yet seen a scenario where that seems to make a lot of sense, and you're only going to accrue that 1 year of service in our plan. But there's nothing that doesn't
mm.
allow that to happen in our 700 employers who are already in the plan. We see a lot of variation in years of service in ages at which people choose to join us.
Okay, so I'd say, I mean, overall, I'd say then someone shouldn't necessarily discount the potential positive impact of Hoop. Let's say if they've got 2 years left of work or 5 years left of work, like it might still be worth at least running some numbers to see if it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it will for them, and that's
Yeah,
where we're going to look at people like you to help help our
sure.
clients understand it. But we're not going to turn them away on that basis.
Right,
So
exactly. Okay, fair enough. And then another thing you mentioned before we hit record that I wanted to talk about was you said that there's a bit of you've made a bit of a shift around like so my assumption, or at least the way that I thought pensions like with things like Hoop and teachers and whatnot worked was there was like a maximum amount you could contribute to because I thought of it more of like, oh, if I'm an employee at a company, I make X, they're going to allow me to contribute a percentage of that number and so on and so forth. You've talked a little bit about some of that, but I was curious, like you mentioned something around how the since physicians have a bit of a different reality than the traditional employee, you talked a bit about the impact like the RCA side of things. If you just want to maybe walk through that like briefly.
sure, and I think there's sort of two separate concepts that are going on. So the first is that for the salary changes year over year for physicians,
Hmm.
um, we are limiting how much the salary can change year over year. And that's
Hmm.
because that pension at the end of the day is based on a formula that includes your years of service, your earnings, and your age when you retire. And it prioritizes your best 60 months of earnings. So we
Right.
do want to have rules in place that allow physicians to participate in our plan more like a regular member of our plan, where you'll see not a lot of wild variation in earnings year over year. The second concept, which is a bit unique to Hoop compared to some of the other plans we've talked about, is that for any of our members, we have what's called a seamless pension plan. So you can earn a pension on all of your earnings that you use to contribute to the plan or you receive from your employer. And we don't limit that pension to a certain earnings level, which is more common in other registered pension plans. The reason for that is we have a concept called a seamless plan, where we are an integrated registered pension plan and retirement compensation arrangement, which are two ITA vehicles that allow you to earn pension income.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So yeah, so it's not the exact same as like using the nurse as an example is a bit more of an employee relationship. Like there's certain parameters that help it look more like an employee relationship, like you said, like not to have these wild swings in like income, but also like this sort of adjustment to account for the corporate side of things.
Yeah, and that thing around the earnings is not, the thing about the variation in earnings is unique to our physicians program. But for
Hmm.
nurses who are in our plan, who have earnings that are at a level that would get them into our retirement compensation arrangement, that
Hmm.
applies to our entire plan. It's not a component that's been created for physicians. What we've really
Okay.
focused on is having physicians participate in the HOOP plan. So we have this one little rule about year over year changes, but all of the other natural attributes of the HOOPP plan are going to apply to a physician. So the physician who is in the hospital and talking to the nurse, you know, over coffee one day will have a same experience of how they can participate in the plan. The same benefits will apply to them, the same contribution rates will apply to them. The disability benefits, the survivor benefits, the leave benefits, all of those things continue to apply in both circumstances. We are still the Healthcare of Ontario pension plan, and our main audience are all of the other members of our plan, and we're adding a new segment to the plan, but we're not changing the plan overall. So this isn't that's some of those components. The only component that's new is this allowing the physician who operates under the MPC to set this earnings level, and then the restriction on how the earnings change.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks for clarifying that. So when it comes to someone thinking about their options, one of the big questions someone might have is, okay, this money that I'm going to give to HOOPP, what if I just invested it myself? Like, what's the good way to look at that? Or is that the right question to ask of like, hey, can I beat their returns? Like, how would someone go about sort of making that decision of, does it make sense or not?
And I think that's a tricky way of approaching the question, because HOOPP has excellent returns year over year, and you can see it on our webpage, and we do very well. But at the end of the day, the thing that you are earning in HOOPP is that pension promise, that formula based on your service earnings and the age at which you start your pension. And what that really means is that you can, when you retire, know that you're going to get a sum of money from us every month, and it's going to keep going for as long as you live. We talked a bit about our survivor benefits. You won't outlive the money. You'll be able to budget around the money. You won't have to worry about a marketplace event that causes the market to decrease. You're not going to lose any of that money as it goes forward. So there is one way of looking at this, which is, what am I putting in? What would I get myself if I did that on my own and had some investment return? But the other way of looking at it is the peace of mind that's created when you know, and this is why I love being in HOOPP, I know when I retire, I'm going to get a monthly pension. I'm not going to have to figure out what my investment return is going to be. I'm not going to have to worry about whether or not I could take myself out of my equities. I know I'm going to get money in my bank account every month for as long as I live, and I'll know what that money is. It'll be predictable. It's not going to vary year over year, except to the extent HOOPP offers cost of living increases on it, which is a decision our board makes annually. And so I can count on it. And that's the thing that I think is hard to compare to an individual product. It's that peace of mind. It's the value of pension. It's the ability to make other decisions in your retirement because you've taken this one off the table. I think that's one of the great values of being in our plan.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, and the other thing is that the risk is quite I'll call it diversified. I'm not sure the best way to call it, but I mean, since you have so many people and so many companies contributing to it, it seems like that's also a big benefit.
Yeah, we're not dependent on one of our employers staying in business and making its contributions. We have a very large employer base, and so when you hear about pension plans and companies going bankrupt in Canada and that resulting in changes to people's underlying benefits, that it's just not the same thing when you're dealing with a multi-employer pension plan of our scale and size. Any individual employer's long-term existence isn't going to impact the benefits we're going to pay from our plan.
Yeah, so that's like spreading that risk around a lot of different companies. And then, I mean, so I feel like, as you mentioned, like that peace of mind is hard to quantify. And I do find that there are some people who are like, you know what, I know that I've got X amount of money. I'm going to be able to live off of it because I'm okay planning on this kind of a return and this kind of a withdrawal and all that stuff. But then there are other people who like that sense of a paycheck in retirement that's either going to cover all their costs or a portion of their costs. And then they know that they've got that baseline that they can depend on no matter what. Like there's definitely people that are going to fall into that category who are like, yes, I like the idea of having that. And yes, I've got other investments that might buffer or might supplement, but knowing what that baseline is will be very attractive.
Yeah, well, and one of the big conversations that happens in the called the individual accumulation world, like the RRSP type world, is how am I going to turn that into a pension income when I retire? How do I turn that into a steady stream of income that will last me my entire life and won't matter if I live to 110, because there'll still be money there for me, and that's taken off the table with a
Mm.
pension. You will be paid for as long as you live.
And then, so if someone's listening to this, someone's a incorporated or maybe gonna be incorporated physician in Ontario and interested in joining, like what would you say are the first steps then to kind of figure out, step one, does this make sense for me? Step two, it does make sense. How do I go about it? Like, what are sort of those, like the nitty gritty sort of steps on the road for someone to figure this out?
So what we have done is tried to produce as much material as we can on our webpage to help with that decision. So hoop.com, HOOPP.com. And we have a section called Joining Hoop. And within that, there's a section that's been specifically designed for a physician that speaks about the steps to joining the plan as a physician. It includes some overall information about Hoop, the employer advantages, the member advantages, some illustrations. There's a physician's guide. And really, those are designed to allow a physician to have a conversation with their financial advisors or planners as well, so that if they need to get some input on what's going to work for them, that it's easily accessible and it's all publicly accessible. Then to start the process of joining Hoop, we have a form that's been set up on our webpage that you can access through those pages. You give us a bit of information and that will trigger us to reach back out to you and to have a conversation about whether or not this works. And we're looking for things like whether or not you have an NPC, whether or not you have other staff. We just want some basic information about you and your organization to help those conversations run more smoothly. I will note there's another component of being an employer in Hoop, which is that all Hoop employers, and all of them, not just physicians, have to be members of the Ontario Hospital Association. The Ontario Hospital Association has its own process for joining them. So that's a secondary process that a physician has to go to if they're not already a member of the OHA.
Okay, very good. So yeah, so my understanding is first step is sort of like you said, like kind of working with a financial professional, like a advisor or planner to see where it fits into the overall stage of things, which totally on my end of things, like what I help people figure out is how much do they need in retirement to begin with? Like that for me is sort of like that backwards engineering of, okay, how much do you need now? How much do you think you're going to need in retirement? Where's it going to come from? Work our way backwards and figure out which sources make the most sense. And then if it does make sense, then go to the website and then be contacted directly to figure out the next steps to participate.
Yeah. And it's all designed so that the physician can have the conversations that they need with whomever as they're going through the process. And then once a physician has applied and has joined our plan, we have all sorts of training and stuff that we do on just how you do the things of being in the plan year over year. Because of course you have to remit contributions to us. You have to tell us what your earnings were for the year. And we've tried to make that as simple as we can.
Very good. Awesome. Well, I mean, is there anything else you think people should know that I haven't asked, or any question that is pending, or any tidbit that you think people should know about this?
Well, for us, this has really been about creating a path for an important part of healthcare to join our plan. We have a long history of being a successful pension provider to the healthcare community in Ontario, and this is part of our desire to see more Ontario healthcare workers have really great pensions in their retirement, and we hope that will be a solution for a number of physicians across Ontario.
Very good. Awesome. Yeah, no, I totally can see how you've seen it work for other healthcare professionals, so why not for physicians? Like why, and I've heard that over and over. Like how come we're not included in these types of things? Like why are we left out? So it's fantastic, a fantastic move in my opinion. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really enlightening. I'm understanding more and more about it, understanding the steps to take and the benefits of joining and what people need to do so. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about our physician program. We are really excited.
No, definitely. No, it is exciting for sure. Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.